it wasn't just damage done. There were 3 people that were killed and 10 were injured. And again, the damage. So this was a serious mistake by the Israeli military. It has been a tough week for Israel and the international Christian community. Serious problems that have erupted over the last week or so. It began with the accidental partial shelling of a church in Gaza, a Roman Catholic church known as the Latin Church, by an IDF tank, we believe, or artillery unit. It's not clear which. We'll get into that in a moment. That triggered heated phone calls between Roman Catholic officials and the State of Israel. It led to a call with Israeli Prime Minister and President Trump, the Israeli Prime Minister, and the new Pope, Leo XIV. That was one issue, but there was another issue, and that was the eruption of the leak, actually, of a letter, a scathing letter that U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee sent to Israel's Minister of the Interior. I'll explain how that all came about, but it was a sharply worded letter in which Huckabee said, look, if you guys aren't going to fix these problems related to evangelicals, then maybe we're going to have problems letting Israelis into America, or telling Christians in America that maybe they're not so welcome here in Israel. Wow, what was that all about? And then the accusation that radical Jewish Israeli settlers living in what we call biblically Judea and Samaria, but the world calls the West Bank or the Palestinian Authority, that radical Jewish settlers had set fire to an ancient church in the West Bank. That proved to be false, 100% false, but this, all of it created a lot of issues, and we're going to talk about them today on Inside the Epicenter. Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg. I'm in Denver, Colorado. I'm one of the founders of the Joshua Fund with my wife, Lynn. Lynn and I started the ministry in 2006. We're 19 years old as a ministry today. And the Joshua Fund exists to bless Israel and her neighbors. That includes the Palestinians. It includes the Lebanese and the Jordanians and the Syrians, the Iraqis and the Egyptians. And really, it's a ministry to invest in and strengthen the church in the epicenter, the followers of Jesus, the followers of Yeshua, the followers of the Messiah in Israel, Israeli Jews and others, and of course Arabs, and sharing the gospel, and to Jews and to Muslims, to make disciples, to help plant churches, to help the church be strong enough to fulfill, Lord willing, the Great Commission in the epicenter, the region that we call Israel and the broader Middle East. And Joshua Fund exists also to educate the church. What is God's heart and plan and purpose for Israel and her neighbors? What has been Israel's history? What has been the neighbors' history? What is the prophetic future of the people of the epicenter? And of course, also to provide humanitarian relief, to show compassion, to provide food and other humanitarian relief to Israelis and Palestinians and others that are suffering, that are poor and needy and vulnerable, and need to see the love of Christ in action, that they hopefully will be able to taste and see that the Lord is good. That's the heart of the Joshua Fund, and that is why we have created this wonderful podcast. Wonderful, I say, in the sense that it gives us a wonderful opportunity, Lynn and I and our team, to share with you what's happening in Israel and the broader Middle East on a weekly basis, and to share with you what God is doing. Yes, we're going to share with you, unfortunately, what the enemies of Israel and what the enemies of peace in the region are doing. We're going to talk about what the enemy, Satan, is doing. But the heart of this ministry and the heart of this podcast, Inside the Epicenter, is to help you understand, what is God doing? Is there hope in the Middle East? There is. Is there a light in the midst of the darkness? There is. And there's a lot to talk about today. So welcome to Inside the Epicenter. I'm in Denver right now. Lynn and I both are. Lynn is on a series of Joshua Fund in meetings and calls today. And so I'm doing the podcasting today. We're in Denver. We've got a series of Joshua Fund board meetings this week. And I'm recording this on Tuesday, July 22nd. And we've got board meetings that begin Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week. So just as you hear this, I want to just give you that time reference, primarily so that you understand that a lot more could be happening between the time I record this and the time we post this, but I just want to give you a sense. It is right now 10:45 in the morning Mountain Time on Tuesday, the 26th of July. And Lynn and I have been in the States now for 3 or 4 weeks, meeting with evangelical leaders, meeting with House Speaker Mike Johnson. I interviewed him, and we're going to be sharing that interview in its entirety upcoming Inside the Epicenter podcast. Really interesting conversation held in his office at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. Also interviewed and met with in Washington the Evangelical Christian who's the head of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. That's the new private organization that is providing now almost 80 million meals in the last 6 or 7 weeks to Gazans who are really at risk because the war has been so severe and it is ongoing in Gaza. So we're gonna talk to him. That interview will be coming up on a very soon upcoming episode of Inside the Epicenter as well. And then the next podcast, Lord willing, that we'll do will be my reflections on my friend John MacArthur, the pastor, the theologian, the author, the speaker who went home to be with the Lord just days ago. And he's been a friend for more than 15 years. I've interviewed him multiple times. We're going to share with you some of my conversation with him, one of those conversations, one of several. And I just want to share some reflections on the life and ministry of John MacArthur. He was a friend. I loved him and I loved spending time with him. I didn't always agree with John or he with me perhaps, but I want to share some reflections on the life of John MacArthur and how he impacted me and his love for Israel and the people of the Middle East. So we'll be sharing that soon as well. Okay, but let's get into this one. Yeah, as I mentioned, it's been a very tough week between Israel and the international Christian community. As the week has ended and we are now in a new week, things have gotten better. But it didn't start well. You'd even say over the week of the last 10 days or so. So let me walk you through a few of these moments that have not been good. We're going to start with the fact that on July 17th, there are 2 historic Christian churches in Gaza City, in the north of the Gaza Strip. One is a Greek Orthodox church. The other one is known as the Latin Church, but it's because of the Latin service held by the Roman Catholic Church that runs that church. And that church was hit by a mortar or a shell from an Israeli. Again, there's an investigation going on. It was either a tank or some reports are that it was an artillery shell. But Israel says it was mistaken. Palestinian Hamas says it was a target. Israel flatly denies that the church itself was a target. But the fact that the church was hit and that fragment of the shell or the church getting clipped, however it actually played out, it wasn't just damage done. There were 3 people that were killed and 10 were injured. And again, the damage. So this was a serious mistake by the Israeli military. It does not, Israel flatly denies that it was intentional. And I can't see any reason why Israel would have intentionally attacked the Roman Catholic Church in Gaza City. I have direct knowledge that the Israeli military has been protecting those 2 churches and the Christians inside them from very close to the beginning of the war. Now, early on, the Israeli Defense Forces ordered all the Christians that were hiding in those churches, and almost all the Christians in Gaza, certainly in northern Gaza, had fled their homes and taken shelter in those 2 churches and some nearby homes and offices at the beginning of the war. To protect themselves from Hamas and protect themselves from the IDF. Okay. And at the beginning of the war, there were estimated somewhere between 1,200 and maybe 1,500 Christians in Gaza. Now, when I say Christians, I don't know their personal faith. I don't know if they're born again, but whether they're Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, or evangelical born again Protestants, that's the cluster of folk that were all huddled together. They were showing unity in their in their desire to huddle and shelter in those two church buildings that are very visible. They're very noticeable. That, they have crosses on them. It's not a shock what those buildings are. Hamas knows it. The IDF knows it. And I spoke at the early on in the war, and I urged senior Israeli cabinet officials and senior Israeli military officials directly, heart to heart, phone to phone, please don't order all those Christians that are huddled in those churches to go south ahead of the coming invasion of the north by the IDF. Israel was telling every Palestinian to move to the south where there was going to be food and shelter and water and medical attention and so forth. But they had to get out of the way of the incoming invasion. But the Christians didn't want to leave. Why? The Christians didn't want to leave because they're Christians and they did not feel comfortable. They did not feel safe, many of them, most of them, to move to the south and huddle with 2 million plus angry, scared Palestinian Muslims. They didn't feel comfortable that their wives and their daughters would be in those environments with no shelter, no protection whatsoever. They didn't know who was who. Was Hamas infiltrating that, those millions as they huddled down in the south? Like that, those were big issues. And I was told by Palestinian Christian leaders, please implore the Israeli cabinet, the Prime Minister Netanyahu himself and his team, and the IDF, don't make all those Christians move. Don't make any of them move. Let them shelter in the church and then just provide protection for them. That was a real concern. The IDF said, look, this is a very hot zone. IDF is shooting. Other militants are shooting. Terrorists are shooting. It's going to be very hard to ensure the safety of those Christians in those churches. But as I kept explaining to them, look, compared to what? At least you know where they are. If they move down south and they're all raped, killed, tortured, whatever, what is Israel going to say to the international community? I understand why you want to do it, but I think you need to carve out an exception for the Christians huddled, sheltered in those two churches, Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic. So in the end, that is what they did. The Israeli Defense Forces and the cabinet said, okay, all right, they can the Christians can stay. And so they have stayed. And now we're, 20, 21 months, whatever it is, into this war, find out exactly what it is. I don't mean to be flippant or give you the impression it's flippant in any way. This war goes on and on and on. And today is the 654th day of war. And so now here are these Christians, they're trying to shelter in this Roman Catholic Church, and it gets hit. Again, the reason I give you some background is to say that I see no possibility that Israel's defense forces actually tried to attack that church. There's no evidence of Hamas taking over the church. There's no snipers on the roofs. There's no reason to attack that church. Now, if they were trying to attack a terrorist position near it or behind it or whatever, is it possible that some of the coordinates got wrong or whatever, or it was a malfunction? Yeah, that's possible. And in fact, that must have been what happened. But I want to say that I accept that there's no evidence that Israel purposely targeted. However, if that's wrong, if some rogue, artillery commander or a tank commander purposely did it, then they're going to have to face justice. Right? There's no excuse for attacking a church. But that's the big picture. And that's why, with the death of 3 and 10 more injured, this is why President Trump called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and said, listen, what in the world just happened? And Netanyahu said it was a mistake. And Trump said, you've got to put out a statement. You got to explain what happened. If there's an investigation that has to ensue, fine, to say that. But you have to get out ahead of this thing because you can't let it stand that a church got hit. And people died and people were injured, and there's no statement from the Israeli government. So Netanyahu did that. At the same time, and then the statement that was formally put out by the IDF read as follows: Israel deeply regrets that stray ammunition hit Gaza's Holy Family Church. That's the name of the church. Every innocent life lost is a tragedy. We share the grief of the families and the faithful. We are grateful to Pope Leo for his words of comfort. Israel is investigating the incident and remains committed to protecting civilians and holy sites. Netanyahu not only needed to do a call with President Trump on this, who really made it a point that this was a big deal to him, and I'm glad he did. But Prime Minister Netanyahu also did a call with Pope Leo XIV, the new Pope, to discuss this as well, because this was a major issue, and of course Pope Leo is responsible ultimately for his flock. So and now Roman Catholic leaders have visited the church, and so this has been a problem. And it in the midst of everything else that has gone well in terms of the U.S.-Israel relationship, in terms of President Trump working with Israel to bomb and destroy Iran's nuclear facilities and the threat posed by Iran's nuclear program, that all led to the absolute heightened top best evidences of U.S.-Israel alliance in I think ever. I can't think of a closer time. And yet war is messy, war is hell, war is difficult, and this was a bad moment for Israel. Unfortunately, it was not Israel's only bad moment. And so I shift now to another part of the story in recent days, and that is that U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee issued, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, a scathing letter. He didn't put it out, but he sent a letter to the Israeli Minister of the Interior, a man named Moshe Arbel. And I'll explain the reasoning and the backstory in a moment. But Ambassador Huckabee felt that the Interior Minister was not listening to U.S. concerns, to Huckabee's personal concerns, professional concerns on behalf of the American Christian community. Some things that the Interior Ministry, in Huckabee's view, was doing wrong and was having a negative effect on the American Christian community and American Christians living and working and serving the Lord in Israel. Huckabee had a private meeting with the Interior Minister. The Interior Minister apologized and said he would fix everything. Things were not fixed. Things got worse. And so Huckabee sent the Interior Minister a very strongly worded letter. It was not intended for public release, but it was pretty strong. We're going to get to that. But then somehow, and my reporting does not yet show how it got leaked, but that is often the case in a leak. But the letter leaked, and so an Israeli news channel published excerpts of the letter, and it made news everywhere. And in it, in the letter, Huckabee was pretty strong. Look, the Interior Ministry in Israel is causing a major problem, and you're not fixing it. It's getting worse. And so with all that, I want to say there is a happy conclusion, and that is the letter had the effect of catching the Interior Minister's attention. The leak, even though I don't think it came from the Huckabee team, maybe somebody in the Interior Minister decided to leak it, thinking that Huckabee was being too strong and maybe had overreached, but it had the opposite effect. It ended up boomeranging. It got the Prime Minister's notice. Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to Ambassador Huckabee and promised that he would get to the bottom of it. And I think it's fair to say Huckabee, Netanyahu and his team made it clear to the Interior Minister, clean up your act, fix this, and let's get this over with. And it is over now. And Ambassador Huckabee has put out a statement saying that the issue is fully resolved. But I want to give you some backstory to it so you understand a little bit more, because this is interesting. And it's interesting in terms of how evangelical Christians are sometimes treated in Israel. And that, of course, is something of great interest to the Joshua Fund. It's of great interest to the readers of All Israel News, which covered all of this. And it's of great interest to those of you who watch the Rosenberg Report. So I want to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to walk you through some of the specifics so you can understand this and you can understand how to pray. I do ask that you would pray for the families of those who lost loved ones in that church in Gaza and the recovery, the full and speedy recovery of those who are injured. And we'll get to some other prayer requests in a moment, but also the inner workings, behind the scenes workings between the American Evangelical community, and the state of Israel, particularly the Interior Ministry, which has been a perennial problem. And we'll get to all of that in just a moment. Stay tuned. Don't go away. We'll be right back with Inside the Epicenter. Let me first read a verse of scripture that really is one that I really love and that I think speaks to this situation. It comes from Proverbs chapter 22, verse 29. I'm reading it from the New American Standard Bible. Do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. Again, do you see a man skilled in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. Welcome back to Inside the Epicenter. I'm Joel Rosenberg, your co-host, and glad to be with you as we're continuing to walk through a very tough week that the state of Israel has had. I want to get back to this issue of why did U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee, himself a very devout and prominent American evangelical Christian, why did he write such a strongly worded and scathing letter? I'm using the word scathing. I think that fits, written to the Israeli Interior Minister, Moshe Arbel. Why was that letter written? And then what was the effect of the letter? And when that letter leaked into the Israeli media, why did it create such a brouhaha? We'll front load again that this issue is now fully resolved, but I want to walk you through some of the specifics so you can be praying. That's a really interesting passage, and obviously anybody who's skilled in his work, there's a lot of people that are skilled in their work and they don't end up meeting with kings. But the point of the person writing this particular proverb is saying people who are skilled in this work, the Lord can raise that person up to be used in very high places to affect important change. And so in this case, I'm speaking of Ambassador Mike Huckabee, a man very skilled in his work, both as a governor for 10 years in Arkansas, very successful governor, as a very devout evangelical Christian who's brought thousands and thousands of evangelical Christians to Israel on tours, that has held events and raised money for Christian organizations, including the Joshua Fund. Then Governor Mike Huckabee was the keynote speaker at one of our events called an Epicenter briefing held at a wonderful hotel in Naples, Florida a few years ago. He was our Governor Huckabee. Then Governor Huckabee was our keynote speaker. And he's spoken for many groups, Christian groups over the years, Jewish groups as well, raising awareness, educating people, and helping Christian and Jewish organizations raise money. And over the years, Mike Huckabee has raised not only awareness and education of Christians, but he has built strong relationships with Israeli leaders, including a very deep and personal friendship with Benjamin Netanyahu. So here we are. Here Huckabee is skilled in his work, well known for what he does, and he gets tapped last fall by then President-elect Donald Trump to be America's next ambassador to Israel. This is, we've covered this. We've talked about this on the podcast, on All Israel News, on the Rosenberg Report, how dramatic that appointment was. And of course, the Huckabee is the first ever devout, prominent evangelical Christian ever to be in this position. So, and for such a time as this, obviously, Huckabee was in place to work between and make sure that the alliance was strong between the United States and Israel during the run-up to Trump's decision to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. And of course, Huckabee was just in Washington, D.C. With Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump as they had meetings to assess the impact of those attacks. And then where do we go from here? We shared about that here on the podcast as Lynn and I sat down with Ambassador Huckabee in Washington. But now we're in this situation, okay, which is very sensitive. So what was the problem? I'm going to read some excerpts from a column I wrote for All Israel News. The column, just putting my cards on the table, was "Thank you, Ambassador Huckabee and Prime Minister Netanyahu, for decisive action to fully resolve serious tensions between Israel's interior ministry, or serious tensions that Israel's interior ministry was creating with evangelical Christians." And basically, what happened is this. I'm gonna actually, so let me read these excerpts. I think that's the best way to give you some context. I write, what exactly was the problem that required intervention from both the American ambassador and the Israeli prime minister? Here's the short version. For the past 6 months or so, mid-level bureaucrats in Israel's Ministry of Interior had been systematically denying clergy visas for American evangelical Christians who work for ministries and church congregations in Israel. They were also slow walking visa renewal applications from American evangelicals. And by this, I mean sometimes they weren't formally denying the visa renewal applications or the visa applications themselves, but these mid-level Israeli bureaucrats in the Ministry of Interior were continually asking for more documents, more details. So they were repeatedly delaying any final decision over just what should be a routine visa renewal request. These are American evangelicals who live, work, serve, minister in Israel. They've been here for years. They have these clergy visas, allows them to, the freedom of their faith to serve the Christian community. And it's always been a high principle of the Israeli government to protect religious freedom and to protect the right and the opportunity for Christians from around the world to come and walk where Jesus walked and walk where the apostles walk and teach the scriptures and so forth and do ministry in the land of Israel. But by these mid-level bureaucrats in the Ministry of Interior denying visas or slow walking or, not really denying, but just never actually giving the green light or approving visa renewal applications, it just kept going on and on. It was not only creating frustration, it was forcing American evangelical clergy to have to hire lawyers and, basically fight the Israeli Ministry of Interior to get what the Israeli government says these clergy are fully entitled to, which is, of course, due process, quick process, and be able to serve and work and live and minister in the land of Israel, the land of Jesus, right? So this was not Prime Minister Netanyahu, having some policy anti-Christian. So, you'll hear that, Netanyahu's anti-Christian. No, I think whatever else you say about Netanyahu, you have to say he's been the most pro-Christian and pro-religious freedom prime minister that Israel has ever had, and has been super supportive and encouraging of the American Christian community, much less the Israeli Christian community and other Christian communities, not only American. So, but this was becoming frustrating. And more than frustrating, it was requiring people to hire lawyers. And even that was not working. And, to be fair, as I say in the column, many government bureaucracies move slowly. Okay. Delays are unfortunate, but they're expected in governments all around the world, and Israel is no exception. Over time, however, it became clear that these were not normal delays, these delays in Israel. Certain officials inside Israel's Ministry of the Interior were purposely rejecting or slow walking visas specifically for evangelicals. In so doing, they were violating the status quo. Israel's government, as I mentioned before, has a long-standing policy of protecting freedom of religion for Christians and all minority faiths, I might add, and of allowing evangelical Christians, Christian pastors and ministry leaders to live, work, and serve in Israel, which is the land of Jesus, the apostles, and the Bible. So this was a problem. And when Mike Huckabee, as the new ambassador, and his wife Janet arrived in Israel in the spring, in late April, I believe it was, Lynn and I invited them over to our apartment for dinner because I've known him for many years. I've been friends for him. Lynn doesn't know Mike or Janet nearly as well, but that's only because I get to spend a lot more time with him than she does. But we invited them over. Hey, come over. It's just casual dinner. There was no formal plan. It was just a relaxed, casual evening. And so the Huckabees, with their security detail, said, absolutely, would love to come over. Lynn made a home-cooked meal, and we just had time to relax, to catch up, to welcome them to Israel, to pray for them, and talk about what's kind of going on the ground here in Israel, both geopolitically, in terms of U.S.-Israel relations, but also in terms of what's going on with Christians here in Israel. Well, I'm in Denver now, but they're in Israel. Now, we had asked another couple if they would join us. Meyers is a prominent evangelical in Israel. He's also a very prominent and successful attorney, and he's a partner in one of Israel's most influential and prominent law firms. And he and his wife came over for dinner. Kalev serves on the Joshua Fund's Israel board. He has been a dear friend and a wonderful legal counselor to us for many, many years and to the ministry. And so we thought it would be great to have them over, in part because Kalev actually represents about 150 different Christian ministries and church organizations in the land of Israel and provides them legal counsel. So when then Governor Huckabee and I led a delegation of a solidarity mission in December of 23 to bring a small group of evangelical leaders, prominent evangelical leaders, to Israel not long after the October 7th attacks and invasion by Hamas. This was the first high-level evangelical delegation to come, and Mike Huckabee and I worked on it together. And one night we had dinner with a number of local Israeli evangelical leaders. And we invited Kalev and his wife to join us. And so they already knew each other. And so I asked Ambassador Huckabee, would you like, we'd like to invite these guys over as well. Are you good with that? And he said, absolutely. Great to see them again. So when the conversation turned to Ambassador Huckabee and Janet saying, so what's going on with the Christians here in Israel? And are there, anything we should know? Well, there are a few things you should know. And so Kalev and I and Lynn shared with them some of these concerns. This has been going on for a while. It wasn't getting better. In fact, it was getting worse. And he was really shocked by this, that a country, that anybody within a government that is so close to the United States, so close to the Christian community, why would they be giving American evangelicals a problem of any kind whatsoever? And so he asked Kalev, could I meet with you and go into this a little bit more? When we're having just a casual dinner party, but could you and I talk about this more? And then let's go have a meeting with the Minister of Interior and get this thing cleaned up. And that's exactly what happened. And at that meeting, the minister was not only meeting with Ambassador Huckabee and Kalev, but the whole group, of a senior staff. I wasn't there, but they all met, and Ambassador Huckabee walked through the problem as he saw it in English, and Kalev reiterated it and gave some more details in Hebrew, so everybody understood what the problems were and what Huckabee was asking for. Clean this up. There really shouldn't be a problem, right? And the minister said, absolutely not. That shouldn't be a problem at all. I don't know what the problem is. I'll go figure it out. We'll make it right. Okay, wonderful. This was not public. This, even though I knew about it, I gave my word that I wouldn't go public with any of this. And one of the couples who'd been not denied their renewal of their visa, but it had gone on forever and ever and ever, and it just kept, and their visas had basically expired, I think, and they had to hire a lawyer and try to figure this out. Well, they got their visas approved within 24, 48 hours. It was super fast, and it was very encouraging. And with that news, Lynn and I left the country right after the Iran war and came to the States a few weeks ago to begin doing meetings all over the country. Well, when we met with Ambassador Huckabee in Washington for our conversation over the Huckabee, Trump, Netanyahu meetings, right? When we turned the tape recorder off and we just were chatting, I said, hey, we want to say thank you also for the great work you've done, Ambassador, for, getting all this stuff cleared up with the Ministry of Interior. In fact, these friends who got their visas happened to come and visit family in the States. We just spent part of a day with them a few days ago. It was really wonderful to see them. Thank you so much. He said, well, you're welcome, but it's actually gotten worse. I'm like, what? And so the situation actually, it's like the mid-level bureaucrats in the Ministry of Interior had I can't tell you exactly because I wasn't there to see it, but the impression was they were like, no, we are not going to make this better. We're going to make these worse. And so they began opening up investigations of all these different Christian ministries that have been working there for decades and have good relationships with the Israeli government. And these are people who have these visas who've been doing this work for years. There's nothing nefarious going on. There's nothing hidden. There's nothing weird. So then Kalev basically went into action and behind the scenes trying to just resolve these problems and say, look, we just met with you guys. The minister said that everything would get cleaned up. Now things are getting worse. They're getting longer delays. What is the problem? Can we get this fixed? And basically, Kalev came to an impasse and couldn't get the things fixed. And so he went back to the ambassador and said, this is getting worse. And that's when Ambassador Huckabee was offended and basically wrote a letter expressing that offense that, the Minister of Interior promised to fix things and they hadn't gotten fixed. Let me just read you a few lines from this letter, which honestly, in my understanding of U.S.-Israel relations, I can't think of a letter ever like this that really just expressed an ambassador's, professional, but very direct and pointed criticisms of an Israeli cabinet minister. He writes, this is on July 16th, Dear Mr. Minister, this is Ambassador Ambassador Mike Huckabee writing to Israeli Interior Minister Moshe Arbel. Dear Mr. Minister, it is with great distress that I write to you my profound disappointment that the meeting held in your office has not resulted in what I hope to be a simple resolution of the issue of routine granting of visas for Christian organizations and workers, as has been practiced for decades. I left the meeting with a very positive feeling that we had resolved the issue that necessitated that meeting. It appeared that a staffing change in the Ministry of Interior resulted in an employee changing the long-practiced process of granting visas to Christian organizations, a list of which is enclosed. And then he adds, but the problem is it's actually gotten worse. And he begins to explain it. And then he writes, the close partnership between the United States and the Israeli government is at an all-time high, having just concluded a joint military operation that will hopefully curtail the threat from an Iranian nuclear ambition. For our formal and cordial official request from the U.S. Embassy Jerusalem to return to the status quo of longstanding practices regarding visas to be rebuffed and made worse is shocking and a source of inexplicable disappointment. Let me reiterate that we are not asking for special or out-of-the-ordinary treatment. We are simply requesting that the long-standing policy that has been employed for generations be continued. It is the abrupt change and additional burden and expense that has been imposed on these Christian organizations without explanation that we find bewildering. The United States and evangelical Christian organizations are your friends. We feel we are being treated as adversaries. And then he goes on, and this is the part I really need you to hear now that you have some context. As the U.S. ambassador representing the United States and President Donald J. Trump, I am formally requesting that this deteriorated relationship with the Interior Ministry be resolved so that the issue is not further escalated. It would be very unfortunate that our embassy would have to publicly announce throughout the United States that the state of Israel is no longer welcoming Christian organizations and their representatives and is instead engaging in harassment and negative treatment toward organizations with long-standing relationships and positive involvement toward Zionism and friendship to the Jewish people in the state of Israel. We would further be obligated to warn Christians in America that their generous contributions to organizations to promote goodwill in Israel are being met with hostility, and that tourists should reconsider travel until this situation is resolved with clarity. Finally, and most regrettably, if the government of Israel continues to cause the expense and bureaucratic harassment for the granting of routine visas that for decades have been routine, I will have no other choice than to instruct our consular section to review options for reciprocal treatment of Israeli citizens seeking visas to the United States. Surely this is not the relationship that the state of Israel wishes to have with its best partner and friend on the planet. That is a strong letter. Now, I want to give Ambassador Huckabee credit here because in some ways, those of you who are Christians, you'll understand what I mean by a Matthew 18 process. In the Bible, the Lord speaks about, Jesus speaks about how to resolve a problem with someone. First, you go to them personally and you try to talk it out. If that doesn't work, you bring others with you, witnesses who can explain, yeah, this is really a problem and it's really not getting fixed. And then, there's a process in Matthew 18 of escalation. Like if this doesn't work and that doesn't work and that, then eventually you go public. And it can result in like a member of a church who's not listening to any of this process reconciliation and an effort to mediate, with that person being, there being a separation between the church and that person, who will be treated like they're not part of the Christian community anymore. Now, that is something for internal Christian relations amongst believers, how you handle certain types of problems. But in effect, Meyers, the lawyer representing the group of these different Christian organizations and ministries and churches, he tried to handle it directly. Then he brought it to the ambassador. The ambassador tried to handle it, and then when that didn't work, Kalev tried to handle it, a little bit more, clarify. When that didn't work, the ambassador wrote this strongly worded letter, but not intending it to get out. I was aware of the letter, but we didn't report on any of this on All Israel News, on the podcast, on the Rosenberg report, because this was something that was going on behind the scenes. Lynn and I were praying about it. Our colleagues were praying about it, but we weren't talking about it because we felt like this is something that will be very easily resolved now that Ambassador Huckabee is involved. And so we were shocked, Lynn and I were, when we read all over the Israeli media that this letter had leaked. And I can be pretty sure it wasn't Ambassador Huckabee who leaked it, because he was not trying to make this public. He was really trying to clean things up privately, but directly and without mincing any words. And that didn't work. So, but I can tell you 100% now, the situation has been resolved. And for fairness, I'm just going to close this part with the statement that Ambassador Huckabee put out as a statement on X, the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, just so you can hear the language, because he sees Ambassador Huckabee CC'd that letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu. So, and of course, because Netanyahu and Huckabee are so close, Huckabee made it clear, look, this is a problem. I'm trying to deal with your Minister of the Interior, but it's not working. So I need you to know about this, he said to the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister moved into action to his credit, and made sure the Minister of the Interior got the picture and got things fixed. And they are fixed now. Fully resolved is the term. Here's the quote. Here's the statement. After meetings with the Minister of the Interior and with the help of the Israeli Prime Minister, I'm happy to report that the issue concerning visas for American evangelical organizations has been fully resolved, Ambassador Huckabee said in the first paragraph of his statement on X. Starting in January, a change in the manner in which visas for Christian organizations had been processed for decades led to serious challenges, bureaucratically and financially, for the groups. Upon arriving in Israel as ambassador, I learned that the changes in the process were creating delays, costs, and significant burdens with paperwork. After meeting with the Minister of Interior, we thought the problem was settled, but organizations continued to have issues. I informed the Prime Minister's office of the problem and pointed out how detrimental it was to the relationship of the State of Israel with the American evangelical community. The Christian organizations did not ask at any time for different or special treatment, but merely for a return to what had been an efficient and satisfactory process for many years. Ambassador Huckabee continued in a statement to say, Attorney Meyers, an Israeli attorney who represents some 150 Christian groups in Israel, was instrumental in outlining the request, and the Prime Minister's office was supportive and involved in the resolution along with the Minister of the Interior. Huckabee continues, I am delighted to report that the issue has been resolved to everyone's satisfaction, and the strong support that Israel enjoys from American evangelicals will continue, stated U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee. I'm convinced that the Interior Minister was not fully aware of the change being imposed, and I'm going to put in parentheses, by mid-level bureaucrats and continued to be advanced by mid-level bureaucrats without, in defiance of the minister. But Huckabee's basically saying that the Interior Minister, that Huckabee's convinced that the Interior Minister wasn't aware of what was really happening, sort of in the bowels of the basement of the Interior Ministry. And Huckabee writes, But I am grateful that he has personally intervened to completely restore the long-standing process. American Christians are some of Israel's strongest supporters, and the resolution of this issue among friends is absolutely welcome. So we did cover the story when it broke of the leak of the Huckabee letter, and we have now covered its resolution in several different articles and columns, including my own column, kind of walking through some of the backstory and praising Ambassador Huckabee and the Prime Minister for working together so well to get this issue resolved. So I'm very encouraged. I wanted you to be aware of it, and I want you to be praying. I mean, you can understand that an Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox leadership inside the Interior Ministry, may not feel comfortable theologically or politically or relationally with evangelical Christians. But that's not their job, is to say that evangelical Christians can't live, work, minister, serve in the land of Israel when we're being such a blessing, right? And Prime Minister Netanyahu's policy is that evangelicals are welcome, and they can certainly, and we have freedom of religion in Israel, and we want evangelical Christians, along with others, Christian minorities and Christians and other religious minorities, to feel free and safe and welcome in Israel. And the Interior Ministry's approach, whether it was a mid-level bureaucrat or not, that was just unacceptable. Unacceptable to Netanyahu, unacceptable to the Netanyahu government, and ultimately unacceptable to the Minister of Interior himself. So that's a positive resolution. It's too bad it went public. I would have been happy to never tell you that there was a problem, never need to ask you to pray about it, and never need to tell you about how it was resolved. But it did go public, and so I thought it was important that we cover it and explain it and give credit and honor where honor and credit are due. One last one, and we'll deal with it really quickly, was a terrible slur and accusation the other day in which, find the right article, in which it was accused that the Israeli Jewish settlers, radical extremist settlers in Judea and Samaria, what the world calls the West Bank, had burned down an ancient church in the Palestinian areas. And this became something that got quoted and printed and condemned all over the world, including in Washington by some. But the fact is, it wasn't even true. Not at all. I've actually, so as All Israel News reported, it was completely not true. And in fact, there has been video of people going to the scene of this historic church and walking around. It's not burnt at all. It's an ancient church. It's an archaeological site. It's not, when you think of a church being burned down, you think of a wooden church being set on fire with torches or, whatever, Molotov cocktails or something. That did not happen. And so you think, well, who's had the interest in making it look like Jews who live in the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria were somehow responsible for torching and burning an ancient church? It didn't happen. There was a fire set outside the stone gates of the church, and you can see some of the charred and brush, but that was not a fire that spread to the church. It wasn't set for the purpose of destroying a church. It's an ancient ruins of a church. We're going to put links to all of these articles into the show notes so that you can see them and you can follow up. But I just wanted to be clear, in a week or 10 days or so that's been rough between Israel and the international Christian community, because there's been serious things have been said that Israel was not doing right. This was not one of them. Okay. It was true that an Israeli shell or ammunition of some sort hit a part of a church in Gaza, the Roman Catholic Church, and 3 people died. This is tragic. This is bad. 10 people were wounded in that church. That's bad. Israel, if it really was Israel, and Israel says it didn't intend to do it. It was an accident, but they're taking responsibility for it. They should take a responsibility, and and this is really bad. Israel needs to take tremendous care that Christians in Gaza are never harmed, ever. Those churches are never harmed, and that those Christians there are protected. They're sheltered. The IDF knows where those Christians are, those 2 churches, Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic, and there's literally no reason for any harm to come to the buildings much less the people, much less there to be actual death. So that was a terrible moment. And Israel does need to investigate it and explain to us what happened. What happened? So that was bad, and it was Netanyahu was right to need to apologize, need to get the word out, explain what happened, take ownership. The IDF take ownership, and to have conversations, probably uncomfortable ones, with President Trump, who doesn't want to see Israel be thought of in any way as harming Christians, and of course speaking to the new Pope himself. So that was how the situation began. Then this whole kerfuffle over visas for evangelical Christian clergy, and to Ambassador Huckabee's tremendous credit and the Prime Minister's credit, they got on it, they dealt with it. Unfortunately, it became public, but it's over. It's fully resolved, and I'm glad about that. And then this other accusation that radical extremists, Jews living in Judea and Samaria, burned down an ancient church, didn't ever happen. Totally false, fake news. And I'm glad to say that All Israel News did not fall, nor did All Arab News fall for that. But we have now covered the clear evidence that this was a fake news and a false allegation. So those are some updates. Would you please continue praying again for the Christians that were wounded in the church in Gaza, that they would fully recover, that Lord would give them grace and comfort and healing, that the Lord would comfort and heal the hearts of the families and the friends and the other believers around them, that Christian community where those three Christians were killed. Would you ask the Lord to make sure the IDF does a thorough and proper investigation and comes clean on exactly what happened? Would you thank the Lord with me for Ambassador Huckabee and Prime Minister Netanyahu for getting something that should have been a small story that never became a public story, but for getting it resolved and getting it done, relatively quickly once the two of them got involved. And let's also be grateful that there wasn't any vandalism or attack on any churches in Judea and Samaria. It's not easy to be a follower of Jesus in Israel or as a Palestinian, but it's not like living in Iran or in Pakistan or Afghanistan or Sudan or some place where Nigeria where Christians are attacked. Syria, like what's going on in Syria? Christians have been slaughtered in Syria, and we'll be talking about that very soon as well. So be praying for the Christians in Israel, praying for Palestinian Christians, praying for the Christians in Syria and throughout the region. Thank you for listening. And I want to encourage you, if you're able to give financially to the Joshua Fund, we would be so grateful. You can go to joshuafund.com, joshuafund.com. You'll see right up in the top right a place to donate. You can click on there, and you can become what's called an Epicenter ally, in which you become a monthly donor. Maybe it's $25 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month, maybe more. But not only giving a gift to help advance the ministry of the Joshua Fund, to be a blessing to Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus. But if you can do it on a monthly basis, then it helps us know with us. And of course, you'll get updates, and we'll let you know how your money is being used. And of course, it also helps to fund this podcast inside the Epicenter, which, as you know, unless you're new, but if you've been with us for a while, you know this went from just a new podcast like hundreds of thousands of others, and to rise during this wartime to being in the top 1.5% of all podcasts in the world. And we're very grateful. And that takes some resources to do. So your funds, when you become an Epicenter ally, help fund that as well. Thank you so much for listening. Please continue to learn, pray, give, and eventually you'll be able to go. We're not quite ready to announce anything about bringing you over to Israel, sending you over to Israel, but we will be. We're working on it. We're praying about it. We want you to be able to learn, pray, give, and go. Again, check out the show notes for links to the articles that I mentioned here. And please like this podcast, share it with others, subscribe to the podcast if you haven't subscribed yet. Have a great week as you walk with the Lord in the power of His Holy Spirit. And we'll see you next time right here on Inside the Epicenter.
I'm Joel Rosenberg. On your left, you'll find some videos we've chosen specifically for you. We look forward to partnering with you to bless Israel and her neighbors in the name of Jesus.